All right, let's go over what we've done. Can someone please turn the lights off? And I expect notes. I will randomly choose dates that I'm going to say, I'd like you to pick August 20th, August 15th, 16th, 17th. I'd like to have those notes uploaded. So I'm going to pick dates. What I'm going to be looking for when I look at your notes, and I will finish grading. I have not finished grading, obviously, but I will finish the grading soon. When I do that, I expect to see growth from week to week, day to day of the notes. If I don't see this growth, then you have issues. Your grades aren't going to be very good when it comes to your notebook, and your notebook is a big part of your grade. Now, what you have to do is you have a sheet of paper. No matter what the paper is, you should have, what you should do is you should have, great. You should have a line down the middle like so, and you should, hold on a second, and you should have another line coming across. It's probably not the best line, but that'll do. It just comes across this way. And here at the top, you're going to want to write in the title of the notes. In this case, this is every page on every day, including notes you might get assigned to do in the chapter once you get your books. You might be told to take notes on chapter 1, right? This is the kind of notes I expect you to take. And we'll go over the 6 R's probably tomorrow, because I want to focus on going over the stuff that you need for the exam. Are we clear? All right. But for now, you should have the title of the notes. In this case, it's test review. Now, how does your English teacher tell you to do your header? Where does she want your header? Say that again, or he? Top left? Top left. So we're going to continue that. And what does she want for your header in the top left? Your first name? Your first or your full name? I can't hear you. Full name. So your name. And what else? Teacher's name. And what else? Uh-oh, something else. Somebody at least remembers there's something else. Anybody else?
The class.
The class, so it would be Mr. Mendoza. You could put Mr. M if you'd like. The class, honors biology, you could put HB, just to make things easier for you. And what else?
It's the date, but at first it's like the number, and then it's the month.
All right, so they want you to do the European method, right? So 20/8/2018. Oops. No. 20, then August, then what? 18. Just 18? Yes. Okay, then 18. There you go. If you only want to put your last name, that's okay. But if you have the same name as someone else and you know it, then put your first initial and last name. But don't just put your first name. And certainly whatever you do, don't put your nickname like, Booby or whatever. Don't put a nickname, because I won't know who that is. All right? I might know who that is, but certainly if I have a student assistant grading it, or if I have my wife helping me grade these things, it's not going to help if it's Booby, because they won't know who Booby is. All right. All right. So there you go. That's just the format. A lot of people think, well, that's it. That's what Cornell Notes is about. It's not. Cornell Notes is not about. That's the least of your worries when it comes to Cornell Notes. Cornell Notes, most of it's going to happen at home. What's important, this area right here is where you're recording. All right, so the area that's This is where you record what's going on. So there's that word record. That's one of your 6 R's, isn't it? Record means anything that's said or written on a board. Okay? Could someone tell me the other R's? I'm not going to say, because you have to know those. And not for this test, but for the next test, you'll have to know them. So let's hear the other R's. Yep.
Revise.
So we heard revise. Does everybody agree with that? With that word, revise? Okay. Yep. Recite. Yep. Reflect. Yep. Go ahead. Reduce. So I heard reduce, reflect, recite. Is that it? I can't hear you. You have to speak up, guys.
We also had written down revise.
Revise. I heard revise already. So let's go ahead and write those down, since I heard, I think, most of them. We have record. We have revise. Could someone take out their sheets and tell me what the 6 R's are? You should have those. I published them for you, handed them out to you, told you to put them in your notebook, said it was important. So we have record as number 1. We have number 2 is reduce. Number 3 is recite. Number 4 is reflect. Number 5 is review. All right? So we have 6 R's. That's 5. Where's the 6? We have record, reduce, recite, reflect, review. What's missing? Revise. 6, revise. This is all based on psychological research written a long time ago, but continues to be supported by all the research that we have about how people think and how they learn. You are special. Everyone in this room is special. Everyone has their own personal strength and weakness. That's granted. Is that clear? But there is no one in here that's outside of the things that I'm talking about. All of us will learn better if we do all 6 of these. There's no exception to this. This is how your brain works. Your brain works just like everyone else's brain. You have synapses, you have a left and right side, you have a corpus callosum that connects the two. When your brain doesn't work that way, you get things, when your brain works differently, you get things like autism and epilepsy, and there's issues that occur with people that whose brains get rewired in a different way. But if you're not that type of special, if you don't have that kind of change to your brain architecture, then you learn by doing these 6 things. So you need to learn how to do them. You want to learn, you want to be successful in school, you have to do these 6 things. The more of them you do it, the more often you do it, the better you learn. The other thing you need to know about taking notes, is that if you don't write it down, and I'll give you more details about this later, you will not do well. You will forget it. You forget 90% of what you don't write down. 90. If you don't write it down, do you know, imagine for a second what you go through in a day. You woke up, you heard birds this morning, you saw the sunrise, there's probably garbage man outside your door, people walking, dogs, the mailman came by yesterday afternoon or Saturday afternoon. God knows how many thousands of things happen just between you getting up in the morning and getting here. Thousands. Do you remember all those thousands of things? No. You've forgotten 90% of them. That's normal. It has to happen. You'd go crazy if you didn't. Does that make sense? You can't remember everything. It's not normal. It's not, and I don't want to say normal. It's going to cause issues if you do remember everything. There are kids that remember everything. You tell them a date. You tell them your birthday, April 5th.
Well, that's my brother.
And they'll tell you, what's his name?
I said, that's my brother.
That's, yeah. And some of you might have brothers or sisters that are like that. There's a kid that I saw on a documentary that could look at something and draw everything as if it were, I mean, when he's done drawing, it's better than a picture. He has everything that he saw is drawn. He looks at it once, he draws everything. Now he can't tie his shoe. He can't remember, he can't say his own name. He rocks back and forth to calm down. But that's because your brain cannot handle all that information. Is that clear? So when people tell me, I'll remember, that's not true. Okay? In order for you to remember, you have to write it down. Now, will you remember something? Sure. But guaranteed, whatever you do remember is only a fraction of what actually happened. That's why you take notes. And here's the killer. You won't remember that you didn't remember. You'll swear up and down that it didn't happen. You didn't say that. I don't remember that. You're lying. No, you just didn't write. You don't remember it. It's okay. It happens to all of us. It's normal. But you need to write it down so that you do remember when you're talking about a class. Because that's the stuff that's going to be on the test. You're going to take the test and go, oh my God, where did this come from? Well, it was told to you several times, but you never wrote it down. So you write down. That's what record is. Reduce. What is reduce? You take all this information, which is a lot often, isn't it? When you're going through a class, you often have a lot of information to deal with in this record section. You have to reduce it. You reduce it here in this end. All right? So maybe we talk about this an experiment. Blah 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 blah. The experiment, the experimenter did this, and this was this, and this was that. Well, you can reduce that. You can reduce all that. And how do you reduce it? You would say you'd say hypothesis, and you can always not finish the sentence, not finish the word. You can just write part of the word, right? So that you don't end up falling behind. You can misspell words. If you misspell them, you can come back later and fill it in. Correct. That's why you take notes in pencil. All right. 2. What would I write? Out of all that, I describe a whole experiment, and there's all kinds of things. What would I write? The hypothesis, then what? Well, I might write the question, right? I might write then the hypothesis. Then I might write the experimental design. And then I might write what? Is it neat? No. Is it completely written and spelled correctly? No. But what is it done? What have I done? I've recorded. And then I've reduced. Right? Reduction, the questions, this you might write as you go along and you're taking notes. Maybe it's a question that pops into your head and you don't want to bother it's something that you feel is going to break up the flow, because you have to be part of this thing we call a classroom lesson. The way you're part of it is you're like, well, I don't want to break the flow. We're in a flow right now. Let me write down this question. How many people have noticed a student raise their hand every 5 seconds and ask a question? They may be good questions, maybe bad questions, in other words, questions that are off task, but what does it do? What does it do? Yeah, those people that raise their hands.
It gets everyone out of focus.
Again, it takes people off on a side venture, right? Which might be fantastic. It's one of those serendipitous moments where we might learn a lot from this one question that's not what the intent of the class was. But what often happens is it's not that, right? Often what happens is that you get this tangential discussion, which is kind of associated with what we were talking about, but it's not, and we end up wasting time, and then we don't get done with what we need to get done, right? And everybody gets frustrated, don't they? Right? Say yes or no. Everybody gets frustrated. It's okay to say no. If you're not frustrated by it, say no, I'm not frustrated by it. Who here feels like they get frustrated when that happens? Yeah, a lot of us do. So if you have a question and it's killing you, right? Because hey, listen, I'm one of those people that loves to ask questions because I'm interested in what someone's talking to me. I'm actually interested in what you have to say. I'm one of those people that asks questions and wants to know about what you're saying. So what you do is you write down the question here in this section. Write the question down. Write it down so you don't forget it. And then ask it later. Because that would be what? When you come back, ask it later and add to it. What are you doing to your notes? Revising. You're revising your notes. So anyways, experimental design, then I would go ahead and collect data, right? And then then you analyze the data. And by the way, this might also be known as results. Analyze, and then I come up with a conclusion. What is that? What did I just write out? Scientific method. And that might be a lot of discussion here. There would be a lot of examples. There'd be examples over here. There'd be all kinds of details over here. But really, I broke it down to these 5 or 6 things that are over here. And these are the things, if I need to know, if I don't remember what a hypothesis is, where am I going to go? Over here on this side. You see? And what happens when I'm studying later? When I'm studying, I would take a card and I'd cover up this end. And then I'd say, hypothesis, what is it? Blah, 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 blah. Let me check it. Experimental design, blah, 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 blah. Let me check it. So I can cover up the details and use this section over here to study with. Does that make sense? And I could actually use it with my group, with my study group. I could say, okay, let's go through. But I can't do that if I didn't write it down. I can't do that if I don't have this organized the way it is here. Then later, every unit or every day's worth of lessons, especially during your study groups, you should write down a thoughtful, this is the key. So many people write down nonsense. They just write down whatever comes in their mind. Oh, we just talked about this. We wasted our time. We just talked about this. This was the thing I got out of it. Whatever. Here, you're going to write down the summary. The big ideas. This is more what? This is more reduction. This is reducing even more. So here you have the details behind the card. Here you have your reduction or your questions, right? You've reduced all that detail into some questions and maybe some key points, some big ideas. And here's the big idea for the whole day's lesson. Of course, this summary has to be done at home or during your study groups. You have to say, okay guys, what was the big idea here? What did we cover? What's going to be testable material? What are we going to see on the end of course exam? That's what you want to write down here. So when you go back to study in May, in April, stuff that you're covered now in August, you can sit there and say, well, let's look at what happened that day. Do I understand that? Yes, check it off. I got that. But you have to test yourself. You have to recite. And that's the other thing. This thing that we use when you use the card to hide and check yourself, that's called recitation. You recite it. You recite it. And then when you test yourself, what are you doing? You're reflecting. You're doing what you did this weekend, I hope. I hope so that when we get into discussion now, as we go start reviewing, because that's what we would do is we would review, and that's what we're doing now in class together, and that's what you should have done all weekend, right? Getting ready for that test on Wednesday. You should have been reviewing, you should have been reflecting, you should have been reciting, and maybe as you look things up, as you went to the Khan Academy video that I sent you, or you went to the other short 1-minute video from that professor in the 60s, if you go back and look at those and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't get that, or I have a question, you revised your notes. You added those to your notes. So now you're in your discussion phase with me. Now we're going over it. Now you ask me specific questions and I answer you, or I tell you I have to go look it up or whatever, right? And we have a discussion where we finalize our study. Now, if you've done all that, then you can expect to do really well on Wednesday, right? Because I've written the test already. I wrote it yesterday, actually Saturday night. So the test is written, I just have to print it. Now the question is, so I know what's going to be on the test. In fact, while I'm talking to you, I'm going to pull it up here, make sure that I cover everything. So I know I've covered everything on the test before you take it. You've been given plenty of opportunities to revise your notes, to review it. You had plenty of notes, you had plenty of materials, handouts that cover all the details, have all the definitions, have all the examples. You had several activities where you worked on it. So there really is no excuse for not doing well. If you don't understand something, some people ask me, I don't understand this, I don't understand that. Over the weekend they sent me a message. I didn't worry too much because I figured we would discuss it in class, right? So there should be no question now, right? That we're able to be successful. Are we good? All right. So that's Cornell Notes in a nutshell, the quick version. I'll try to sell you on it a little better by going through some of the research probably Friday, right after we do lab safety. And lab safety is going to be quick, but there's just a lot. I want to make sure we all understand how to handle fluids before we do our lab. Our first lab is next week. All right, you have ProCore next week for physical science and for biology. And then you have, so you have 2 ProCores next week. I think it's next week. One of the ProCores might be this week for you. I'm not sure if you have another ProCore. I think you have a history ProCore as well. You might have a special pre-test for gym if you have gym. You have NWAs coming up, right? In English and math. So all those tests are coming up. Now let me give you one real quick thing about this test because I can just see some of you starting to stress out. These tests are not tests. They are what we call diagnostic. They are pre-tests. All you got to do is do your best. That's it. In fact, I'm trying not to stress you out. So what I'm going to tell you is what I'm going to look for on the ProCore is growth. That's all the people that are giving it to you. It's not us. It's someone from downtown or the state or whatever. When they give you these tests, all they're looking for is what? Growth. This is what I know now, and at the end of the year, this is what I know, and what do they want to see? Growth. So if you have, let's say you only get 20% on this ProCore, and you get 40% on the second time you take it, what did you just show? Growth. Success. Now, I expect you to do better than that, but I'm just saying, this ProCore, ladies and gentlemen, is just looking to grow. Now, if you sit there and talk during the day, instead of doing your work, you don't do these 6 R's, you're not paying attention, then come the second time you take it, guess what happens? Stays the same or goes negative. You actually do worse the second time. I've had some kids do that. Most kids shoot up, man. They get 18%, 20% better, 50% better. They had 30% in the fall, and they got 80% in the spring. Just crazy numbers, right? But there's always a few that show negative growth. They go backwards. They had 20% in August, and they have like 10% in spring. And it's the same test. It's exactly the same test. I don't look at it. I don't want to know what's on the daggone thing. I don't. But I know they tell me it's exactly the same test. How do you do that? The only way that happens is, in my opinion, there's only 2 reasons. One, you have some serious test anxiety that you need help with, right? Like you have to see a therapist about, because I'm not making jokes or being sarcastic. Like, you really need to see someone if you have test anxiety so badly that it makes you mess up this much. 2, you have other life issues that are bothering you. Who knows? We all go through some stuff. Or 3, you just weren't listening. And most of the time, guess what? You were cheating, not listening, coming up with excuses for an entire year and then you come up and try to take this test again, guess what's going to happen? You're not going to do well. That's all there is to it. If you pay attention and do well, and actually try to work your way through it, I mean, I'm telling you, from just based on numbers, the first year they did the end of course exam, we had 99% of the ninth graders, only one student didn't pass or get a 3 on the end of course exam. 3 is, for all intents and purposes, passing. Last year, only 4 ninth graders didn't. Now 4 out of 100 something. So I'm just letting you know, if you do what I tell you, you're going to be successful more likely than not. Okay? All right, so Procore, don't sweat it. It's just a day of taking tests. You're not going to know anything on the test. Most of the stuff on the test you're not going to know. You haven't been taught it yet. Does that make sense? Nobody expects you to do well on that test. It's just not going to happen. You haven't even heard of most of the things on that test. You're going to learn about it this year. The same with the history and whatever. You might have learned about this or that and the other thing, so you'll say, oh, I remember that. You answer the question. But most of the time, it's the kinds of questions they're asking you for much deeper than what you've learned. For instance, who's done a Punnett Square? Raise your hand. Look around the room, see how many people did Punnett Squares before. Yes, you should have done Punnett Squares. The state says you should have done Punnett Squares by now. This is part of the state benchmark. Now let me ask you this. When you see a Punnett Square, let me tell you this. When you see a Punnett Square on this Procore, more likely than not, it's going to be a dihybrid cross. It'll be a non-Mendelian genetics. You'll get some kind of sex-linked trait. And my guess is, and again, I haven't seen the test, but my guess is that you're going to get some kind of question like that that's going to throw a loop. You're going to do a regular Punnett Square. You're going to feel that you know what you did right, you did well on that question. And guess what? Guess. Make a guess.
You did it wrong.
You did it wrong. The only reason you did it wrong is you haven't been taught it yet. All right? So don't feel bad going in. I hate giving you these tests without ever describing it to you or explaining to you, because kids feel like they've just wasted a day and they feel stupid. That's how it feels, doesn't it? When you do a test and you're just like, dang, I don't know nothing. Well, it's not that you don't know, it's not that you're stupid, children. You're very smart. The problem is you haven't covered the information. You're not expected to do well on this test. Is that clear? So don't go into these pre-tests and these Procores thinking, oh, I'm going to do well. Oh my God, I'm so stressed out. There's no reason to be stressed out. Just go in and do your best and end it. All right? All right, sorry, but I think it's important that we discuss that. What's going on with that? All right, let me pause this before I say. All right, so let's start reviewing for this exam. At first, let me start out by saying, what kinds of questions do you have? Anybody have questions over any homework questions, any questions that you've resubmitted? Because by now, everybody's submitted everything at least once, if not a couple times. Yeah?
I'm going to ask what's the difference between a positive and a negative.
Excellent question. My guess is that there's about 90% of the people in this room don't understand. Does anybody understand the difference between positive and negative control group? Why is he the only one that answered the question then? Why is he the only one that asked the question, rather? You know what I'm saying? Your parents are going to ask me, how come my kid's not doing well? Can you get my kid some tutoring? We're in class, and you're not asking questions. Let's start learning. Okay, so anyways, moving on. Positive control group and negative control group. Hold on a second. All right, so positive control group, and I would be taking notes at this point. This would be in the record section of your notes, right? And a negative control group. Let's make a comparison. You know what? Let's do a different kind of comparison. Graphic organizer. Let's do 2 circles. Let's draw one circle here, and let's draw another circle here. You've seen these Venn diagrams before, haven't you? Yeah. And in this area, let's go ahead and call it the positive control. And let's call this area here the negative control. Now you all tell me what you know of, and let's in the middle, what would we call it? The middle is the things that we would be, that would define just a control group, right? All right. So what is a control group? First of all, we should understand that first, right? What's a control group? What are the qualities of a control group? When you're looking at an experiment, because you're going to see an experiment on this test. I'm going to give you an experiment. I'm going to give you data. I'm going to give you a graph. I'm telling you right now what's going to be on this test. There's going to be data, there's going to be a graph, there's going to be a description of an experiment, and you're going to have to identify the positive and negative and control groups and what's the controlled variables, what are the experimental variables, that kind of stuff. So that's your test. It's multiple choice. Choose this one, this one, this one, and this one. Fair? Yeah, it's fair. So what's a control group? No one? Yeah, go ahead. Wait, you know what? No, I don't want you to answer, because I can tell you no. I want all of you to participate in this, not just some of you. Yeah, go ahead and tell me.
Isn't it a group that controls like a variable?
Good guess. It not controls a variable. Yeah, and bet. The group where nothing changes. I like that idea. It's the group where things. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it the group that you keep the same in order to see the it's the group that you keep the same to see what changed with the
Experimental.
dependent variable?
What changed with the dependent variables? Excellent way. This is the thing that you. Yeah, go ahead. You have something to say? You can go ahead and add on everything.
Oh, I was just gonna say, isn't it like the group that shows that only one variable is changing something?
Very good. Yeah, I like everything you're all saying. You're dancing around it. It's always hard to put things into words, right? I'm not going to ask you a definition on the test. I won't ask you to define a control group. All right. I think if I did, do I ask you if I asked you to define a control group, I would tell you to make a control group. Does that make sense? I wouldn't ask you to define it in your own words. Yeah.
It's the variables are constant and unchanged.
I'm glad you said that, because that's always, remember I said, I don't know if you remember what I said last week, because I don't know if you wrote it down, right? But these are groups, these are control groups. There's something else that's kind of associated with it, so they're not part of the circle, but they're kind of touching the circle. Okay, so there's a whole other circle that's touching the circle, but really isn't part of it. They don't really overlap, but they're close to it. They're the control variables. They're the variables that are controlled. Do you understand that? I think I remember telling you guys. Do you guys remember me saying, be careful? These two words are very close to one another. These two ideas, people always mix them up. These are the variables that are controlled. In an experiment, you control all the variables except one, right? Is that right? Yes or no? It's okay if you disagree. In fact, I'd rather you disagree now. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe you're wrong, but we settle that now rather than on the day of the test. Okay? So do you understand that control variables are all the variables that you control, which is everything except for one, right? Does that make sense? Everything except for that experimental variable, the one thing you're going to change. Agreed?
Yes.
Okay. So that's a control variable. That's what you just described, and that's fine. I'm glad that you mentioned that, so we can put that off to the side. That's always going to be there. There are always going to be variables that are controlled. Good. But so we make sure we understand that there's a difference between that and the control group. The control group is what everyone said so far. So let's go through and state what everyone has said. I'm going to reword it if you don't mind. What people have said, and they're right, is a control group is used to compare, right, with the experimental group. What I heard people say is, you look at how does the dependent variable change in this control group versus, in the control group versus the experimental group, yeah.
So, do all the experiments have a control group? Because the rabbit ones, when they were on the island, they didn't have a control group. Or are they supposed to have?
I think that's an excellent question, all right? The difference between the rabbit experiment, if you go back and look at it on your Jupiter Grays, open up the document, look at a page, there's a little notation that the writers wrote. And what they said is that back when that experiment, that classic experiment in biology was done, back in 1870 something, they didn't use the word control group. They used different groups. They didn't even use the word group, right? They called each one a different experiment. But really, what you had was you had different groups. Today we use the word groups. So one of those three, actually two of those three experiments with the rabbits, two of them were controls. One was a positive control and the other was a negative control. The other one was the experimental group. So you remember that one of the groups, and guys, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember correctly, there was one where they exposed the rabbits to the bacteria and they put them in bad conditions. They put them in a hole in a box, right? It was wet and dank. There's another group, so that was when they exposed it and they had bad conditions. What would you call that one? Yeah.
A negative control.
All right, so write down in pencil what you think it should be, everyone, and we'll see when we talk about it. So would you expect those rabbits to get sicker, to survive less or not? Those rabbits that have the bacteria and they're in bad conditions, do you expect them to get sicker and die faster? So that's a yes. So you call that negative or positive?
Positive.
It's the positive control. It's the one that you expect. You said it, didn't you? I'm not using names because I'm recording, right? So you said this, didn't you? You said I would use a control group to compare how the dependent variable changes. Didn't you say that? Yes, you did. And so when we look at the positive control, what we see is that the dependent variable changes the way we think it does. Right? In other words, in the positive control, we look and see what does it look like when you have a high mortality rate, right? What does it look like when these rabbits are all dead or dying because they're sick and in bad conditions? So you say, here we know, this is the known positive. What does the positive look like, right? What does it look like when rabbits die in massive numbers because they're in bad conditions and they've been exposed to the bacteria? So the other group that they described, and I'm glad you mentioned the rabbit experiment because it's a great common experience that we've all had, because we've all been through it, right? We've all walked through that, hopefully, as homework and as classwork. The other group was they put the rabbits in a dark condition, in dank condition, but what did they not do? Yeah,
Put them with bacteria.
that's right, no bacteria. So here, the negative control is when you have, what does it look like? When you know it should be negative. And I believe what they told you is we had germ theory, remember germ theory? This says that disease is caused by germs, right? And here the germ was not present, right? And they knew at this point that tuberculosis was caused by the tuberculosis, that MTB, right? We knew that MTB caused the tuberculosis. So this is what the negative should look like. And what did we see in the example? In the example rabbit, what did we see? We saw what? They start up, but not as much, right? Less death. Does that make sense? If you go back and look at it, if you don't remember, there was less death than the positive. Do you remember that? Yeah. In fact, there was less death here than what? Or the experimental. Do you remember that? Because what was the experimental group? What was the experimental group in this case? And since we have the control group and positive group, let's go ahead and do over here again. There's another group here. There's kind of tangential, not a control, but it's certainly associated with the control groups, and that's the experimental group. The experimental group is the unknown. And what were we chasing the unknown? What was it that we were looking for in the unknown? What was it? In the rabbit experiment. What was that group? What did that group look like? The experimental group. So we had one group of rabbits that were in the hole, but they didn't have bacteria. The other group of rabbits were in the hole, but they did have bacteria. Yeah?
The other ones had bacteria, but were in a good environment.
That's right. Here we have bacteria, but the question, the experimental group is only going to change one thing. What's the one thing we're changing? The environment they're living in. So now you have bacteria, they're known, it's a known experience, it's known that they do have it, they are infected, but they're in a good environment. But the question, the unknown is what? Will they survive better or worse? And what did it look like in the example, by the way? In the example, what did we have? In the rabbit example, did they survive better or worse? Well, better than the positive control, right? But worse than the negative. And that's what we expected, isn't it? That's what led the doctor to say, okay, well, definitely living conditions is a good therapy. Right? Well, how do we know that? Because we compared the dependent variables, didn't we? We compared the dependent variables between the three groups. What was the dependent variable in this case? The survivability of the rabbits. How well the rabbits survived. And so in the unknown, they did better than the positive control, but worse than the negative control. They should do worse because they have the bacteria. They've been exposed to tuberculosis. Somebody should die. If tuberculosis causes the disease, and we know it does, then there should be more death than there would be if there wasn't any bacteria, right? So, and in fact, that's what we saw. Question.
Why didn't they have, what was that? Oh, why didn't they have a rabbit group that they didn't do anything to?
They could have. That's a good question. They could have had a rabbit group that and they should have, right? They didn't expose the bacteria, and they lived in a good environment. See how many died there? You're right. They could have done a lot. That's one of those things. Remember at the end of the activity, they asked you, what would you have done to improve it? That would have improved the experiment. In fact, that kind of discussion, what you just said, that kind of intellectual question, is what we do all the time in science. When we present to other scientists, you do your experiment and you present your experiment to a journal like Nature or Science, then they read it, they send it to 3 readers, they'll send it to you and to you. You guys read the experiment and you know what they write back? Maybe you should have a group of rabbits that has neither. And then they got to go back and do that before they can resubmit, because they have to resubmit. Just like you resubmit, they have to resubmit their journal after they make those changes, their article. And then if they made their changes, send it right back to those 3 people. Those 3 people read it again. They're like, oh, okay, that's good. And then they publish it. That's called peer review. Peer review happens all the time in every field. Yeah.
I was saying, sometimes the people don't listen.
Then they don't get published. And so, like you said, if you said that, and the journal sends it back to me, and I'm like, oh, this lady's crazy. I'm not doing that. Then you don't publish it. It doesn't get published. And so once you get that back as a scientist, you need to do that. And by the way, that goes for health peer-reviewed magazines and business review magazines. Anybody that wants to publish something in a peer-reviewed journal has to listen to the peer reviewers. They have to change it, or they don't get published. Okay. So there's your negative control. We described it. There's your experimental group. Now let's look at the positive control. What did it look like in the example? What was the known in the example, the rabbit example? At both the negative condition, a bacteria, TB, and bad conditions. Are we good with that idea? Do we understand what we're talking about here? Do we understand what a positive and negative control group is now? You need to go back and look at those examples if you didn't get it before Wednesday, and make sure you understand. And if you need more examples, we can go through more examples. Do you want a couple more examples that allow us to look at a positive and negative and experimental group? All right, a quick example. Yeah.
About the control variables, can you say what it was?
The controlled variables were the conditions, the bad conditions, the good conditions, right? So what were the variables that were controlled? Those were, was it wet and dry? How much food did they get? Did all the different conditions, the living conditions of the rabbit, and of course whether they got the bacteria or not. That was also controlled, wasn't it? You just didn't pick a wild rabbit and throw it in the experiment because you didn't know if that wild rabbit had tuberculosis or not. So you had to manage all those different factors. Yeah.
Do you think they bred those rabbits just for that experiment?
Probably. In fact, that's what we do today. Now, whether the doctor, I forget his name. Anybody remember his name? I hate Trudell. Whether Dr. Trudell did it or not, I'm not sure. But I can tell you, in science today, we make sure we get mice, rabbits, whatever from a breeder. We have it controlled so we know the genetics of those rabbits. We know what they have, what they don't have. Because that way, if I do something and we get a positive result, and you do something, you get a negative result, we know it wasn't the mice. They have exactly the same conditions, unless they caught a bug between us and while they went from the breeder to you. We get them all, they're all raised in the same environment, so we control everything from conception to the experiment. Now, did Trudeau do that? Probably, but he might have had some control over that, not quite as much control, but that is a concern. That is a concern. Because he could have had rabbits, maybe he got one group of rabbits from one breeder, another group from the other breeder, maybe that other group had the genetics that allowed them to survive better. You know, we don't know. Because unfortunately, life isn't simple. We used to think it's either, here's the question that people used to ask, is it nature or is it nurture? Is it the environment or is it your blood? Back in the 1800s, they thought it was your blood. You inherited it. If you had any disease, it was your fault. Your parents' fault. There's something wrong with you. Then later we came up with germ theory, that disease is caused by germs. But today we know that it's a combination of both. Disease is caused by germs, that's true. But your susceptibility, the ability, how sick you get, and how well you're able to fight off that disease, turns out is part of your genetics. All right? It's also part of your experience, your life experience, and your exposure to other things. So there is no one or the other, it's one and the other. All right, so let's go to the next. Thank you for waiting, by the way. It's very polite of you. Yeah?
Can you show us the graph that you're gonna have us?
No, but I'll give you a graph. I'll give you an example. I'm not going to give you the graph this time. Hey, I worked very hard to make that test, to make it fair, because I always worry about this, is can they answer it? But I don't want to make it too easy, because then what? Next time, what are you going to do? You won't study. So I need you to study, but I also don't want you to be disappointed in yourself or think things are unfair. But I have to try to challenge you, because if you're not challenged, you get bored, right? So yes, you do, don't lie. Everybody does. It's a natural human reaction.
I get happy.
You get happy for a second, but then later when it's time to study, you're bored, you're like, I'm not studying. I'm going to play my video games, call my girlfriend, call my boyfriend, get on Facebook, whatever, Instagram, basketball, whatever, you know? FaceTime, I don't know, whatever. All right, so let's go ahead and then do an experiment, quick experiment. I'm just thinking of it off the top of my head, and we only got a few minutes, so it's a simple experiment, all right? Let's pick fertilizer. Does fertilizer help plants grow or not? So here's fertilizer X. Fertilizer X. Does fertilizer X help the plant grow? That's the question. So we're going to have a bunch of controlled variables. What kind of controlled variables are you going to have? What are you going to control in the experiment? Yeah?
We'll find like the weather with like a greenhouse.
So when you say weather, what do you mean?
Like
How much water they get?
like if it's too humid or something.
Okay, humidity. What else? Yeah?
The type of plant.
Yep, excellent. The plant. Today we can even make sure they're all clones, right? We make sure that they're all the same genetics. Yeah. Well, that's going to be our. Yeah, we are going to control it. How much fertilizer? What else are we going to do? Yeah.
How much water?
Water. What else? So one big one, you guys don't forget. We're talking about plants. Yeah.
Sunlight.
How much light? Doesn't have to be sun, but definitely has to be how much light. Anything else? The soil, probably want the soil control. Are we good with that? Let's just leave it at that. It's a simple experiment. So we're going to make sure all those are the same, right? Except maybe, of course, we're going to have to change. We will have to change one of these. One of these is going to be the experimental variable. What's going to be the experimental variable? Yeah. The fertilizer. How much fertilizer? This is the one we're going to change. We're going to change it though. But we need to change it, right? Because if we want to know if the fertilizer helps, we have to change the fertilizer. I mean, that's just all there is to it. So now let's go ahead and make 3 groups. We make a box. Everything else is going to be the same. So we'll have 3 boxes. In the experimental group, in the experimental group, there's going to be several different groups, subgroups, right? So we're going to have maybe 5% fertilizer, 10% fertilizer, right? What else? 15, 20, 30, right? Let's say that. That's what we're going to put in the experimental groups, and we're going to see if it works. Does it grow better? What are we going to have in the negative control? What are we going to have in the negative control? Say again? Yeah.
What do these plants with no fertilizer?
No fertilizer. Easiest pie, right? No fertilizer. And what do you do with the positive control? That's going to be harder in this example. But let's go ahead and just say, if we have these percentages, in the experimental group, what are you going to put in your positive control? Yeah.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Can the positive control be the dependent variable sometimes?
No, not usually. I can't think of an example that might be true. I'm not going to say absolutely no because I have to think about it, but I'm going to say no. The dependent variable is, what is the dependent variable here, by the way? Huh? The growth, how much it grows. Excellent. How much does the plant grow? Right? That's the dependent variable. The independent variable is how much fertilizer, right? So the independent variable is here, independent. The dependent is the growth. Right? Independent is how much for us, the concentration. So what's the positive control? Just a quick, if 0 is the negative, huh? I can't hear you. The most concentrated, 100%. We got 100% fertilizer over here. Do we get any growth with 100% fertilizer? Do we get any growth with negative percent? And then how much growth do we get everywhere in between, right? So that's a quick example of positive and negative control. And what we would expect is we would get, what would be the expectation is, however, if you put in all these fertilizers and they don't grow any bigger than the negative control, what do you say? The fertilizer doesn't help. It's no good. Yeah, I know. But did you get that?
Can you repeat that?
That's a comparison group. You can watch it on the video. I said on the video you can watch it. We don't have a lot of time. But what I said is if your negative control plant, if your experimental group doesn't grow any taller than your experimental group, then what does that say to you? That the fertilizer didn't help you. It doesn't help, right? That's what we're doing. We're comparing the dependent, just exactly what you said, right? We're comparing the results, the dependent variable, the changes in the dependent variable based on the changes in the independent variable, that we know the negative control didn't have that independent variable at all, and the positive control had the maximum amount of that independent variable. Does that make sense? What did you understand about that?
We were talking kind of
All right, come here. Come here. Hurry up, quickly. Come over here because we have another class coming in. Quickly. So we changed the independent variable. Do you see that? The independent variable is, that's all we're changing here. Everything else is the same, right? Okay. The dependent variable is what we're comparing between the 3 groups, right? How much does it grow? This is what you said in the beginning. Remember that? You said we're going to compare the different group, the dependent variable in all 3 groups, right? Do you agree?
something like that.
Yeah, you said exactly that. But now listen, hold on, please. So what you got to think about is that when you're setting up the negative and positive controls, The negative control has none of the independent variables, right? And the positive control has 100% of it, or is the maximum amount of the independent variables. And that allows you to compare all three groups. Is that clear?
Yeah.
All right, get going, get the question.